Welcome once again to channel SoulThoughts. Let's talk about elevation at the time of death, or we can call it elevation at death. There are different kinds of transcendentalists who are called yogis, Hatha yogis, Gyan yogis, Dhyan yogis, or Bhakti yogis. And all of them are eligible to be transferred to the spiritual world. The word yoga means to link up, and the yoga systems are meant to enable us to think with the transcendental world. As we discussed in our previous videos, that we are all connected to the Supreme Lord, but now we have been affected by the material contamination. The process is that we have to return to the spiritual world. And that process of linking up is called yoga. Another meaning of the word yoga is plus. At the present moment, we are minus God or minus the Supreme. When we add Krishna or God to our lives, this human form of life becomes perfect. During our lifetime, we have to practice the method of approaching that perfection, so that at the time of death, when we have to give up the material body, the perfection can be realized. Bhagavad Gita chapter 8 shloka 10 says, "One who at the time of death fixes his life hair between the eyebrows and in the full devotion engages himself in remembering the Supreme Lord, and will certainly attain to the Supreme Personality of Godhead." Srila Prabhupada, founder Acharya of ISKCON, says in his book Beyond Birth and Death that just as a student studies a subject for 4 or 5 years and then takes the examination and receives a degree, similarly with the subject of life, if we practice during our lives for the examination at the time of death, and if we pass the examination, we are transferred to spiritual world. Our whole life is examined at the time of death. Bhagavad Gita chapter 8 shloka 6 says, "Whatever state of being one remembers when he quits his body, that state he will attain without fail." Prabhupada says in his book that there is a Bengali proverb that says that whatever one does for perfection will be tested at the time of death. In Bhagavad Gita, Krishna describes what one should do when giving up the body. For Dhyan yogi, that's the meditators, Lord Krishna speaks that persons learned in the Vedas who utter Omkara, that's the word syllable Om, and who are great sages in the renounced order, enter into Brahman. Desiring such perfection, one practices celibacy. Krishna explains to Arjuna that I shall now explain to you this process by which one may attain salvation. The yogic situation is that of detachment from all sensual engagements, closing all the doors of senses and fixing the mind on the heart and the life air at the top of the head. One establishes himself in the yoga as per Bhagavad Gita chapter 8 shloka 11 and 12. In the yoga system, this process is called pratyahara, which means just the opposite. Although during life the eyes are engaged in seeing worldly beauty, at death one has to retract the senses from their objects and see the beauty within. Similarly, the ears are accustomed to hearing so many sounds in the world, but at the moment of death, one has to hear the transcendental Omkara from within. After being situated in this yoga practice and vibrating the sacred syllable Om, the supreme combination of letters. If one thinks of Supreme Personality of Godhead, that's Lord Krishna, and quits his body, he will certainly reach the spiritual planets. Bhagavad Gita chapter 8 shloka 13 mentions as this. In this way, all the senses have to be stopped in their external activities and concentrated on the form of Vishnu Murti, the form of God. The mind is very turbulent, but it has to be fixed on the Lord in the heart. When the mind is fixed within the heart and the life air is transferred to top of the head, one can attain the perfection of yoga. At this point, yogi determines where he is to go. In the material universe, there are innumerable planets, and beyond this universe, there is the spiritual universe. The yogis have information of these places from Vedic literatures. Just as one going to America can get some idea what the country is like by reading books, one can also have the knowledge of spiritual planets by reading the Vedic literatures. The yogi knows all these descriptions and he can transfer himself to any planet he likes without the help of any kind of spaceship. Space traveled by mechanical means is not the accepted form of elevation to the other planets. That's not the right process. Perhaps with the great deal of time, effort, and money, a few men may be able to reach other planets by material means like spaceships, spacesuits, etc. But this is very, very cumbersome and very impractical method. In any case, it's not possible to go beyond the material universe by mechanical means. The generally accepted method for transferal to higher planets is the practice of meditational yoga or jnana system. The bhakti yoga system, however, is not to be practiced for transferal to any material planet, especially for those who consider themselves servants of Lord Krishna, who is the Supreme Lord. They are not interested in any of these planets in this material world because they know that on whatever planet one enters in the material sky, the four principles of birth, old age, disease and death are definitely present. On higher planets, the duration of life may be longer than on this earth, but death is there nonetheless. By material universe, we refer to those planets where birth, old age, disease and death reside, and by spiritual universe, we refer to those planets where there is no birth, old age, disease and death, and those who are intelligent do not try to elevate themselves to any planet within the material universe. As Prabhupada mentions in his book, that if one tries to enter higher planets by mechanical means, instant death is assured, for the body cannot stand the radical changes in the atmosphere. But if one attempts to go to higher planets by means of yoga system, he will acquire a suitable body for the entrance. We can see this demonstrated very much on this earth, for we know that it's not possible for human beings like us to live in the sea, in a watery atmosphere, nor it is possible for aquatics like fishes and other animals who are surviving in the oceans to live on the earth. As we understand that even on this planet, one has to have a particular type of body to live in a particular place, so a particular type of body is required for other planets as well. On the higher planets, bodies live much longer than on the earth, where 6 months on the earth can be equal to 1 day of that higher planet. Thus, the Vedas describe that those who live on higher planets live upward to 10,000 Earth years. Yet, despite such a long lifespan, death awaits everyone. If one lives 20,000 or maybe 50,000 or even millions of years in the material world, the years are all counted, but death is surely there after that. How can we escape this subjugation by death? That is the lesson of Bhagavad Gita. Lord Krishna in chapter 2, shloka 20 mentions in the Bhagavad Gita that for the soul there is never birth nor death. Not once having been does he ever cease to be. He is unborn, eternal, ever existing, undying and primeval. He is not slain when the body is slain. We are spirit soul, and as such we are eternal. Why then should we subject ourselves to birth and death? One who asks this question is to be considered definitely an intelligent person. Those who are Krishna conscious are very intelligent because they are not interested in gaining entrance to any planet where there is death. They will reject a long duration of life in order to attain a body like God's. Ishvara Paramaha Krishna Sachidananda Vigraha. Sat means eternal, Chit means full of knowledge, and Ananda means full of pleasure. Krishna is the reservoir of all pleasure. If we transfer ourselves from this body into the spiritual world, either to Krishna Loka, that is the Krishna's planet, or any other spiritual planet, we will receive a similar Sachidanand body. Thus, the aim of those who are in Krishna consciousness is different from those who are trying to promote themselves to higher planets within this material world. The self or soul of the individual is a minute spiritual spark. The perfection of yoga lies in transferal of this spiritual spark to the top of the head. Having attained this, the yogi can transfer himself to any planet in the material world according to his desire. If the yogi is curious to know what the moon is like, he can transfer himself there, or he is interested in higher planets, then he can transfer himself there, just as travelers go to New York, Canada, Toronto, or maybe Melbourne or other cities on the earth. Wherever one goes on the earth, he finds the same visa and custom systems operating, and on all the material planets one can similarly see the principles of birth, old age, disease and death operating. At the point of death, the yogi can pronounce Omkara, Om syllable, the concise form of transcendental sound vibration. If the yogi can vibrate this sound and at the same time remember Krishna or Vishnu, he attains the highest goal. It is the process of yoga to concentrate the mind on Lord Vishnu. The impersonalists imagine some form of Supreme Lord, but the personalists do not imagine this, they actually see it. Whether one imagines him or actually sees him, one has to concentrate his mind on the personal form of Krishna. That's for very sure. Krishna says in chapter 8, shloka 14, that for one who remembers me without deviation, I am easy to obtain. O son of Pritha, because of his constant engagement in the devotional service. So, those who are satisfied with the temporary life, temporary pleasure, and temporary facilities are not to be considered intelligent, at least not according to Bhagavad Gita. According to the Gita, one whose brain substance is very small is interested in all temporary things. Srila Prabhupada mentions that we are eternal. So, why should we be interested in temporary things? No one wants a non-permanent situation. If we are living in an apartment and the landlord asks us to vacate, we feel very sorry about it. But we are not sorry if we move into a better apartment. It is our nature because we are permanent, so we always think of a permanent residence. We don't wish to die because in actuality we are permanent, nor do we want to grow old or diseased because these are all external or non-permanent states. Although we are not meant to suffer from fever, sometimes fever comes and we have to take precautions and remedies to get well again. The fourfold miseries are like a fever and they are all due to the material body. If somehow we can get out of the material body, we can escape the miseries that are integral with it. For the impersonalists to get out of this temporary body, Krishna here advises that they vibrate the syllable Om. In this way, they can be assured of the transmigration into the spiritual world. However, although they may enter the spiritual world, but they cannot enter into any of the planets there. They remain outside in the Brahm Jyoti. The Brahm Jyoti is a level before Krishna Loka. The Brahm Jyoti may be compared to the sunshine, and the spiritual planets may be considered or may be compared to sun itself. In the spiritual sky, impersonalists remain in the effulgence of the Supreme Lord, the Brahm Jyoti. The impersonalists are placed in Brahm Jyoti as spiritual sparks, and in this way the Brahm Jyoti is filled with these all spiritual sparks. This is what is meant by merging into the spiritual existence. It should not be considered that one merges into Brahm Jyoti in the sense of becoming one with it, the individuality of spiritual spark, but because the impersonalist does not want to take a personal form, he is found as a spiritual spark in that effulgence. Just as the sunshine is composed of so many atomic particles, so the Brahm Jyoti is composed of so many spiritual sparks. However, as living entities, we want enjoyment. Being in itself is not enough. We want bliss, that is Ananda, as well as being Sat. In this entirety, the living entity is composed of three qualities: eternality, knowledge, and bliss. Those who enter impersonally into Brahm Jyoti can remain there for some time in full knowledge that they are now merged homogeneously with Brahman. But they cannot have the eternal Anand or the bliss because that part is wanting. One may remain alone in room for some time and may enjoy himself in reading a book or engaging in some thought, but it is not possible to remain in that room for years and years and at a time, and certainly not all the eternity. Therefore, for one who merges impersonally into the existence of Supreme, there is every chance of falling down into this material world in order to acquire some association. This is the verdict of Srimad Bhagavatam as Srila Prabhupada mentions it. Astronauts may travel thousands and thousands of miles, but if they do not find rest on some planet, they have to again return to the earth. In any case, rest is required. In the impersonal form, the rest is uncertain. Therefore, Srimad Bhagavatam says that even after so much endeavor, if the impersonalist enters into the spiritual world and acquires an impersonal form, he returns again into the material world because of neglecting to serve the Supreme Lord in love and devotion. As long as we are here on the earth, we must learn to practice to love and serve Krishna, who is the Supreme Lord. If we learn this, we can enter into those spiritual planets. The impersonalist position in the spiritual planet is non-permanent, for out of loneliness he will attempt to acquire some association. Because he does not associate personally with the Supreme Lord, he has to return again to the world and associate with conditioned living entities here on the earth. It is of utmost importance that we know the nature of our constitutional position. We want eternity, complete knowledge, and also pleasure. When we are left alone for a long time in the impersonal Brahm Jyoti, we cannot have pleasure, and therefore we accept the pleasure given by the material world. But in Krishna consciousness, the real pleasure is enjoyed. In the material world, it is generally accepted that the highest pleasure is the sexual activities. This is a perverted reflection of sexual pleasure in the spiritual world, the pleasure of association with Krishna. But we should not think that pleasure is like the sexual pleasure in the material world. We should not compare it at all. No, it's very much different. But unless sexual life is there in the spiritual world, it cannot be reflected here. Here, it is simply a perverted reflection, but the actual life is there in Krishna, who is full of all the pleasure. Therefore, the best process is to train ourselves now so that at the time of death we can or we may transfer ourselves to the spiritual universe, to the Krishna Loka or Krishna's planet, and there associate with Lord Krishna. Brahma Samhita contains a wonderful description about Sri Krishna and his abode. The way it says, I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, the first progenitor, who is tending the cows, fulfilling all the desires in abodes built with spiritual gems, surrounded by millions of wish-fulfilling trees, always served with great reverence and affection by hundreds and thousands of Lakshmis or Gopis. This is the description of Krishna Loka. The houses are made of what is called touchstone. Whatever touchstone touches immediately turns into gold. The trees are wish-fulfilling trees or desire trees, for one can receive from them whatever he wishes for. In this world, we get mangoes from the mango trees and apples from the apple tree, but there from tree one can get whatever he desires. Similarly, the cows are called surabhi and they yield an endless supply of milk. These are the descriptions of the spiritual planets found in the Vedic scriptures. In this material world, we have become acclimatized to birth, death, and all sorts of suffering. Material scientists have discovered many facilities for sense enjoyment and destruction, but they have discovered no solutions to problems of old age, disease, and death. They cannot make any machine that will check death, old age, or disease. We can manufacture something that will accelerate death, but nothing will stop death for sure. Those who are intelligent, however, are not concerned with fourfold miseries of material life, but with the elevation to the spiritual planets. One who is continuously in trance does not divert his attention to anything else. He is always situated in trance. His mind is always filled with thought of Krishna without deviation, anywhere and at any time. Prabhupada mentions in his book that I lived in Vrindavan and now I am in America, but this does not mean that I am out of Vrindavan. Because I think of Krishna always, then I am always in Vrindavan regardless of the material designation. Krishna consciousness means that one always lives with Krishna on that spiritual planet Goloka Vrindavana, and that one is simply waiting to give up his material body. Krishna says himself in Bhagavad Gita that he can be easily purchased by the person who is always continuously remembering him. Then why should we take any other process except Bhakti Yoga? We can chant Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. We can chant this 24 hours a day. There are no rules, no regulations. We can chant this in the street, in the subway, or at our homes, or in the office. There's absolutely no tax and no expense. So why don't we do it? Let's do it. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.